All right. So Cecilia, you want to kick it off?
Of course. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first virtual training hosted by ReflectUs. My name is Cecilia Silva, and I am your Dallas County Site Manager. We here at ReflectUs are so excited to host this first online training powered by the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies, otherwise known as APAICS. APAICS is one of our 8 national coalition partners, along with Represent Women, She Should Run, Empowered Women, Women's Public Leadership Network, Ignite National, Vote, Run, Lead, and Latinas Represent. Thank you so much for logging on and joining us today. The ReflectUs Dallas County team has been working very hard to continue to provide these trainings even with the new COVID-19 restrictions. Before we get started, I want to give a few thank yous. Thank you to our intern, Andrea Flores, and the previous site manager, Amanda Arisola, for helping make this webinar possible. Finally, after this webinar, please be on the lookout for an email from me. We will be following up with you so we can get your feedback from this training and also to loop you in on future events that we will be hosting. If you need to contact me beforehand, please feel free to do so at Cecilia@ReflectUs. Please also consider attending our future events at the link posted in the chat box. Thank you again to APAICS and Madeline for hosting this training, and I'll go ahead and let you take over.
Great. Thank you so much, Cecilia, for the welcome. We really wish that we could be there in person. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and we really were excited to come out to Dallas for this training. And we are just as not as excited, however, equally enthusiastic in doing this and bringing this to this audience. So thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. As Cecilia mentioned, I work at APAICS. I'm the president and CEO, and the work that we do is really to increase Asian American Pacific Islander representation. And so this is where we would like to increase that at all levels of government, from community advocacy to elected office. So this is where we can kind of give you guys an opportunity to see what it looks like to run for office, and we hope that you'll be able to join us in some of our other programs that we run for the idea of joining us in public service. So wanted to also introduce APAICS Director of Programs and Community Engagement, Alex Wang, and he can talk to you a little bit more about our other programs.
Hey everybody, it's really great to meet you guys and glad that you're able to join us today. As Madeline was saying, APAICS is committed to increasing the representation of Asian Pacific Americans across the whole entire political process. So we're talking from all levels, local, state, and federal. And that's why we're really glad to have you guys joining us here today. As the Director of Programs and Community Engagement, we actually have quite a few different programs to fill in the gaps of what we call, the political pipeline of Asian Pacific Americans. And so we have programs like our long-running ones, for example, the Congressional Internship and the Congressional Fellowship Program, which places, future young AAPI leaders right onto Capitol Hill in different members of Congress's offices and on committee offices, House and Senate side. We also have some leadership academies to give you kind of the nuts and the bolts to run for office. So if this is something that you're considering, if you're thinking about, or let's say you're an elected currently and you want to seek higher office, we have the regional leadership academies, which is what we had hoped to bring to Dallas. And we're looking, after we get through what we're going through right now, hoping to really come down to the Dallas region soon to really give you guys what we call our 2-day regional leadership academy. And we also have our national leadership academy, which is kind of like the regional leadership academy, but graduated. And that's where we really try to demystify the process behind what it takes and what do you need to do to run for office and to run a successful campaign. Because like Madeline was saying, what we're really committed to doing is just increasing representation, especially APA, AAPI representation across all levels of the political process. We have a couple of new programs that APAICS is really excited about this year too. And one is a brand new high school program called the Youth Leadership Academy, where we're bringing some aspiring high schoolers out to DC for a 1-week immersion experience. It's very civically engaged, that's the focus, and we're having them meet with members of Congress, learn how to grow their own leadership skills, and fill out that part of the pipeline. And another new program too is to grow current congressional staff to become leaders on Capitol Hill as well. So we have a bunch of different programs, and those are just the ones. Oh, actually forgot a big one too is our women's collective. And this is, I think, 2 years in the running now too. And I'd say That's a great summit that we have. We're hosting it in Washington, D.C. in the summer. And it's a great summit for leadership development, specifically focusing on growing AAPI women leadership in the political pipeline. There's a lot of programs, and if you think that you're interested in doing one of our other programs, or if you know somebody who might be interested in one of those that I mentioned earlier, just head over to apaics.org. That's our website. And if you have any other questions, you can just email me. I'm at programs@apaics.org for more information on all those programs. There's a lot of good information, a lot of different ways for you and the people in your community to get engaged. And so we encourage you to go and check it out. All right, thanks. I'm going to hand it back to you, Madeline.
Terrific. Thank you, Alex. So to help us out in terms of managing this webinar, if you look on your screen, you will see a chat box. This will allow you to communicate with the panel, with myself, with everyone else who's in the room during the webinar. So please feel free to put that on there if you have any questions. Alex will be helping me in terms of managing some of that, just so that I'm not looking at 3 different places at once. But we want to still do an icebreaker for us so that we have an opportunity to know who's in the room. So we're going to start off, and you can just put it right into the chat box. If you could be any comic hero, who would you be? And so I'm going to start off with Wonder Woman. So take some time to think about that and put the answers into the chat box. And then I also would like to know if you have ever worked or volunteered on a campaign, or you yourself have ever been a candidate. So if you can just drop me those notes into the chat box, and I can see who fills any of those asks, and also who you'd like to be if you could be a comic hero. So in the meantime, we are going to load up my screen so I can share with you a PowerPoint presentation and give you a sort of a rundown of some of the things that we normally like to ask candidates as they start to think about if they want to run for office. I'm loving your answers. We've got Batman, Dr. Strange, Wonder Woman. We've got some folks who have worked on campaigns in the past. So this is great. I'm excited to see that we've got some folks who have been a part of the electoral process in doing that. So excellent, and all wonderful choices for your comic heroes. We'd have a really great, great band there. Okay, so we're gonna go over to this PowerPoint presentation here. So if you just give me 1 second. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my screen right now. What you see is our first slide, really, to talk about women representation. And here you see former Congresswoman Patsy Mink. She was also a co-founder of KPAC, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, of which APAICS is affiliated. We're basically their nonprofit arm, and the caucus is comprised of all of the Asian American Pacific Islander members of the U.S. House and Senate. So we're always working with them, and we work closely with them in regards to legislation that they're pushing out, and giving them a platform to talk about that. And then also we work with them in terms of putting in interns and fellows into our offices. And right now, Congresswoman Judy Chu of California is the chair. So we're going to get started on this. So wanted to also just share the heat map that we have. So please take a look at that. It's also on the ReflectUs website. It really just kind of shows what offices are available in the Dallas area. And so it's always important to see like what's out there in terms of the elected officials and elected offices that you can consider in running. So one of the first things we want to ever really ask is, are you ready to run? And a lot of that comes from understanding some questions that we'd like to have you reflect upon, because it is important to have that internal infrastructure for yourself and have folks who will support you in this process, because it does take a village for this endeavor. And sometimes we don't think about that as we run, because we have all these great ideas and we want to push those forward, and then we get into the middle of it and realize, wait, I have some other challenges that I haven't really thought about. So when you are in this process, we really want you to think about, are your family and friends on board with you? That's so important, because if you're a working mom, if you are whatever stage of life that you're in, having a close-knit group of people who know your values and understand how you're, what you're thinking is so important in terms of why you want to do this. People might say, outside of your circle, that you might be, crazy for doing it. And these are the folks who will, support you and really have your back when it comes time to making this decision. So, really getting a temperature from your family and friends on whether or not you are, prepared, because you're gonna need all of their help as well. Are you mentally and physically ready to run? It's an exhausting endeavor. You spend so much time all day, every day. And it's really a mental game as well, because if you have, a personality that feels like you have to be on at times, you basically are. So when you think about that, you really do have to think about, do you have the fortitude to be able to handle having lots of people talk to you all the time? Going out and talking to people in public, going out and really discussing your ideas. It's totally possible to do this if you're an introvert. It's totally possible to do this, if you are physically challenged. It's just that you do have to take stock of that and also be able to cushion the time to be able to prepare yourself. A lot of times people want to schedule themselves to the brim. And in the end, what happens is you've now mentally and physically exhausted yourself, and you're not really prepared for the next day. And so as much as we want to talk about boundaries and trying to ascertain whether or not you can do it, you also have to set those boundaries yourself, because you know your limits. And if you don't enforce them when it comes to your schedule, you will put yourself in a situation that you may not want to return to. So, we always ask, are you mentally and physically ready to run? Because it will be exhausting. What are your weaknesses? Those are sort of the things that, what we would consider your vulnerabilities. And so don't take it to, the point where you convince yourself that you're not qualified, because weaknesses are really a question of more than just qualifications. Weaknesses are really about understanding, how disciplined you are, how, and also figuring out how do you combat that. And so those weaknesses can actually turn out to be strengths at the end, because then you'll start to figure out what's the best way for me to turn this into a positive for myself. And so even recognizing the things that you are not good at, who do you need to complement those abilities so that you will be better at it? I always like to say that I am the best procrastinator around. And most people don't believe me when I say that I'm a procrastinator, because I tend to have everything done on time, because I don't like to be rushed, but I'm still a procrastinator. So that seems to be a contradictory statement. But in the end, I just recognize that if left to my own devices, I will procrastinate and wait to the end. And so that means I have to have deadlines. I have to have the external pressure that tells me that I have to get it done. And because I don't like feeling rushed, I know that I will want to measure out my work performance. So just recognizing those things so that you can then turn it around to create strategies for yourself, so that you can end up doing the things that you want to do, are just important, just to be able to list those out. Do you have a public platform? Do you already do advocacy work? Do you already have an opportunity to talk to people, because in the work you're doing, you're already, a leader? And that's so important to recognize, because people already see you as leaders, and this gives you another opportunity to elevate that, or even just, transfer some of that. A very good friend of mine, she was a community advocate, and she ended up winning a state legislative seat because people just encouraged her to run when there was an open seat. And she never thought of herself as an elected official. And what's so important is recognizing that other people see you in ways that you may not see yourself. And so if you're already out there doing the work, I am sure they're already out there trying to convince you to do something else in an elected official capacity. So you really do have an opportunity to transform some of that. And so when you're already out there working for the people, you probably have something that people are interested in hearing from you anyway. Can you fundraise and find donors for your campaign? So if you've ever had to be scrappy, this is definitely the place where you have to be scrappy, you have to be disciplined, and you have to be persistent. So all of us have probably done it in some capacity, whether it's for someone else, whether it's for a cause that you already support. These are things that you do every day in some capacity. This is now just another form of organizing that allows you to ask people for money instead of asking them for their vote. And so this gives you an opportunity to actually coalesce people who you may not think would want to support you. This is a way for people outside of your district to consider to support you if they can't vote for you. There's a lot of opportunities for people in terms of networking and finding people who would support your campaign because they believe in you and your values. So you probably already do it, you just don't call it fundraising. Do you have a team behind you? And so this may not be a paid team, this can be a volunteer team, this can be people who believe in you and want to support you. And so if you understand that there are people who already are encouraging you to do this, this automatically means that you have a team. And all you have to do really is formulate and ask, find the resources that you need, in the sense of, I need someone who writes well, or I need someone who is a graphic designer, or someone who has social media skills. All of those things are attributes that you can find in people who want to help you. And so that is what we mean by having a team behind you. What are your motivations and issues that you're running for? So this is definitely one of the most important pieces, because this is why you are running for office. You oftentimes find people who run for office because they find a specific pressure point that is causing angst, pain, some sort of negativity within a community. And they know that they have the ability to help bring solutions to that challenge. And so that might be part of your motivation, and that might be part of the issues that you are most interested in trying to help resolve. There might be community issues or community constituencies that you are most interested in supporting and helping. So that is so important to recognize, that the reason why you're running is because you want to be a problem solver, and identifying the problems that are most unique to that district, the ones that are most prevalent to that district, the ones that are considered priorities for that district, are really what you're doing, is being a problem solver and addressing those issues. So finding your motivations and the issues that you're most passionate about in creating solutions is where you will find how you will create the message of why you're running. And most importantly, do you believe that you can win? Because there will be times when you will have up and down days, and those days will be varied. And we certainly hope that you will always have the fortitude to know that you can win. And believing in yourself and having the people behind you to support you is really important, in the sense of trying to understand how that you believe in yourself, because they look to you for inspiration as well. And once you get to a place where you believe that you can't win, morale can go down. And in that sense, you want people to always, be honest with them, be transparent with them, and at the same time, give them, that inspiration of why you are the person who's most suited to be in that elected office. So we think these questions are really both cerebral as well as emotional, in the sense of trying to find ways that you will, have to, take these issues to heart, because you will have to spend some time really thinking about who you are as a person, what values you are most aligned to, who are the people around you that can support you while you're going through this process. And so being able to understand that will also just give you a better sense of if you're ready to run. So we like to think at APAICS, with a campaign Kickstarter, really, a campaign is really the process of winning the heart and the head. And for yourself, the head is always going to be about the math. How much do you need to win? How many votes do you need to win? While the heart is really about your message. So the things that you need to think about in terms of the head is, as we mentioned, are you qualified? But not in the sense of experience and past your abilities. It's more or less, do you have the basic requirements to file for office? Is there an age requirement? Is there a residency requirement? Have you done all your homework in terms of this seat requires this type of work? Because then that way you have a better sense of, oh, okay, I fit these requirements in terms of the qualifications. Do you already have a public profile? So as I mentioned earlier, if you've already worked in the community, work in a specific issue, that obviously already has you somewhat in a public profile, because you are a subject matter expert and you're already out there talking about specific issues. Have you done all the political research? Have you checked to see who's running, who's the incumbent, is it an open seat? All of these things are important because it allows you to better take a snapshot of the political landscape. And every cycle is different because circumstances are different. So you always want to take a look at who might be thinking about retiring, who might be thinking about running for a higher seat. All of those things are important just because you kind of put your ear to the ground and you listen to the people who are talking about these races and these elections. And so when you do that kind of political research, you're taking a look at the landscape and seeing what the possibilities might be. Can this race be won? So a lot of times we're thinking about the future in terms of an election cycle. So taking a temperature of what do the locals talk about at the political meetings, people saying they like a certain candidate over someone else. All of these things are important. You just kind of take a temperature of what people are talking about in terms of your potential candidates. You want to look at party registrants, because that in itself is the math. If you look at one party and you see that there's an overwhelming number of that particular party, that tells you that that might actually be, and you're of the same party, then that might actually be, something that would be in your favor. If the opposing party has larger numbers, statistically that may not be in your favor. So you need to sort of take a look at where you might align in that. If it's a nonpartisan race, you kind of can tell from the way people vote or their where they stand on certain issues by their comments, where they might stand on where they might fall in terms of the political spectrum. And so that gives you a sense of whether or not you and with the party registrants, whether or not that gives you a some where you might fall in that. The demographic breakdown, and is this the race your best opportunity? Demographic breakdown just gives you a sense of who the constituents are, who the voters are, and so a lot of times we tend to think of birds of a feather flock together. And so if you know that a district is really diverse, we're AAPI candidates, how are we in terms of our voting habits in that diversity? Is this race your best opportunity in the sense of, is there another race that might be more suited to you? Is this race something that really aligns with the values that you have, as well as the issues that you care about the most? Because obviously certain jurisdictions don't allow for certain laws to be created or policies to be created. So if you care about something that's within the jurisdiction of a certain election, that's where you might want to consider. Otherwise, you might want to look at something else if they have jurisdiction over it. And then the impact of external factors, variables outside of your control. So like we said, sometimes circumstances are extenuating and you never know what happens. And then also, the political climate. I've had an opportunity to work with Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois before she was a member of the U.S. House. And she lost her very first congressional race. So you can have a really stellar bio and qualifications such as Senator Duckworth. She's a veteran. She was someone who is she was shot down in a Black Hawk helicopter while serving as a pilot, and was recuperating from her injuries at Walter Reed Hospital, and was basically recruited to run for Congress. And she lost her very first race. And so just the political climate itself can sometimes be overbearing, and that's something that you can't control. Do you have the financial resources? So this question is really about how much will this race cost? It's not necessarily a question about your own ability, like your own financial stance on things. However, it will affect your financial resources, your personal financial resources, because a lot of times people do have to give up their jobs because they're running for office, or they have a part-time job because they're running for office and they still need to provide some income. So, all of that is a part of it, because campaigning is already a challenging thing to do when you're spending your time, trying to convince people to vote for you when you may or may not have, steady employment. So the next part is the heart part. And this is really understanding what is your why. How do you want to be remembered? This might seem a little morbid. Discovery exercise of writing your obituary. This is where you want to write down what you want to be remembered for, what you did, what you were able to accomplish. And this is really what kind of helps you understand your why. Because going back to some of our original questions, when you start to think about how you want to have people know what motivates you and what issues are important to you, this is all related to that. As women, we have recognized, and specifically AAPI women, we were partners in a survey with the Barbara Lee Family Foundation. They're a national organization that's where its mission is to increase more women executives in elected office. And so what they're looking for are women to be mayors or governors. And what we did with them was we did a survey where basically we put an API woman, 50 years old, regardless of party, running against a white male candidate for governor, and each time the API woman won. And what really was the part that was most fascinating was she didn't have any public service experience. What she did have was private-public partnership experience. She created economic opportunity, and she was a community advocate. So those things are qualifications that the general public as voters deem as, a qualified candidate. And so that to me is really important, because that means as AAPI women, you don't have to go through what most people would consider your traditional ladder, like Board of Education, City Council, those types of things to ascend into senior leadership and senior executive leadership if you're running for higher office. So this to me is important in turn, sharing this message with you, because A lot of times people don't think that they don't think that they are qualified themselves, whereas everyone else thinks that they are. And as AAPI women, we have a very specific version of how we communicate our message. A lot of times people want to hear about your upbringing or your personal story. For AAPI women, we have to lead with what we've done in terms of our professional experience. So you start with that, and then you integrate your personal experience of whether or not you are an immigrant, whether or not you were raised in a single family home or a single parent home. So things of that nature are not as important when it comes to an AAPI woman's story. So people want to hear about your experience first. And so that is part of the creation of your why. And again, back to your, what is your motivation? So, family and friends, do your loved ones support you? Are you willing to ask your friends and family for help? Because they're definitely going to have to be around for you to be able to feel that you can be in a safe place, that you can kind of let your guard down. It's definitely, one of those things where having that support is so tremendously helpful in terms of your mental health and success. And knowing that you have the ability to lean on your family and friends so that they can help you in this time. So taking stock of that is very important for your own sort of mental health. Are you in good health? Are you able to take this race on mentally and physically? So part of those questions, again, in terms of reflection for that. So we have a campaign plan checklist. And so this is basically looking at, different things that you need to consider when you're writing out your campaign plan. A vote goal, a budget, a fundraising plan, a timeline, your messaging, voter targets, a campaign team, get out the vote plan, a media strategy. So all of these are basically things that you would want to think about when you are creating a campaign plan, because these are all parts of the moving pieces that are combined and all of that equals a real campaign. So the finances of a campaign plan, you need to think about the administration parts, the voter contact and research and communications, because it costs money, to run a campaign. And so, being able to do these things are what pays a campaign. So whether if you're going to spend money on a direct mail piece, if you're going to, how are you going to reach out to your voters and do research on issues that they care about? All of these things, take money. So, that's what you need to consider when you're thinking about what you're spending your campaign funds on. The finances of a campaign on an administration level is basically, do you have a paid campaign staffer? Is it a campaign manager? Is it a field person? Is it a fundraising person? If you are able to have a campaign office, you're going to have to think about the rent for that, setting it up with internet, having furniture, computers, phones, equipment, a phone bill, if you're going to staff it with folks and their cell phones, your regular office supplies of just postage, envelopes, and mailers, getting your campaign website together, your internet advertisements, whether it's your social media ads or web ads, and of course, coffee. Unless you're like me, that would just be a lot of tea, since I don't really drink coffee. And then the finances of a campaign voter contact and research. Voter contact might be direct mail, it might be brochures, it might be yard signs. All of those things are really about whatever message that you have created, bringing it to the voters and having them understand who you are as a candidate. So being able to pay for those things and create those materials, you need to be able to have a budget for that. And so depending on how advanced your campaign is, you may or may not have some or all of these things. And so it's all meant to be there as a way for you to kind of see what your menu selection might be of, what type of voter contact tools you'll be using in any of these campaigns. With events, you see a lot of campaigns of events. do you have to pay for a venue? Do you have to pay for catering? The outreach itself. So a lot of times people are really fortunate, you've got to lean on your friends and family, who's going to be able to host something for you at their home. And maybe you have folks who will do a potluck. There's a lot of ways to do this on a grassroots level where you don't have to pay for everything. Obviously still be aware of all of the finance rules and compliance that you would have to learn to be sure that you aren't violating any of that. But all of those things are important to know in terms of what can and what you cannot do when you're hosting these events. Research. You've got, if you have a big enough campaign, there'll be polling and opposition research. Kind of gives you a temperature of what your constituents, what the voters want, and also opposition research in terms of the other campaigns who might be running in the same race. So your opponents. So all of that's really important in terms of what you think you might need to do in terms of creating a better message for yourself to create a contrast between you and your opponents, because campaigns are ultimately about that contrast. If you have candidates who are very much alike in their stances on public policy, how can you differentiate yourself? And that is really what makes candidates different. The ones who can stand out because they are different, different experiences, different perspectives. So being able to contrast yourself from someone else, even though you might have the same policy stances, is really important to better give you a sense of so that people can remember who you are. And then for communications, a comms team, if you have the ability to pay for one, usually there might be a director of communications or a press secretary, a digital team to help spread your message through social media platforms. So being able to either have volunteers to do this or someone who's a professional who handles this is something that you need to consider when you start to think about how much you want to spend on your campaign. And then the media aspects, like creating videos or ads or translation costs, because we know that Texas and Dallas is, has such a diverse population. Do you need things in translated materials at the doors, because you have a constituency that needs to read it in their native language. So that also costs money. And then earned media, which is basically op-eds, different types of ways that you can get people to come to a rollout of a press release or something that you're talking about that deals with specific public policy. So all of these things do cost money. They can also be done on a voluntary basis. That's where you have to kind of take a stock of who do you have in your network who would be able to help you in terms of volunteering their services to be able to do that for you. So fundraising tips, which is really important just because of the fact that you do have to spend so much time raising money. You want to do your research. How much does this race cost in comparable election years? And so when we think about comparable election years, we think about this is a presidential cycle. So you want to look at this particular race you're interested in. How much should it cost in another presidential year? How much cash on hand does the incumbent have currently if you're running against an incumbent? So that way exactly if that person has been doing their job in fundraising while they've been in office. All of that's important because generally if you're a first-time candidate, you're starting with 0 in your campaign account. And so we want you to be successful in raising what you need to do what you need to win. You don't need to raise a lot in the sense of an excessive amount of money, in the sense of looking back at other years when this race has gone on. You can see how that's the beauty of public transparency for the public, is that we get to see how much a race costs by looking at all of the election filings. And so this gives you a chance to see how much this race has cost in a similar year, how much money was spent, where it was spent, how it was spent, and when it was spent, because we all have to do filings. And so that allows us to see what a campaign is spending its money on. You got to review your contacts and your network. And you have to think of a high and low ask. So if you've got friends in your network who you think you have financial capacity, depending on your finance laws and their limits, you might be able to ask them, a higher dollar amount because they have, the financial capacity to give. If you know them and they have, that they're maybe struggling a little bit, they have to pay, their kids' college tuition, or they're going through something. So maybe you want to give them sort of a lower dollar amount in your mind. And that to me gives you the opportunity to figure out from your friends and family itself, how much can I raise from them? On a good day, maybe you get me at $100. On a bad day, maybe you get me at $50. And so if you do both of those asks, and you basically take your entire network and you put those highs and lows down and you add them up, this is what you get as sort of your high and low of how much money you can raise from your friends and family. And so that really means taking stock of who you know, and how well do you know them to be comfortable in asking them for a contribution. And from there, you got to write a plan and establish a timelines. And your fundraising toolbox, call time, which is basically picking up the phone and calling your friends directly, just asking them, for a contribution. A finance committee, a group of people who you know have diverse networks, who can each take on responsibilities of saying, like, I'm going to raise you $500, and we're all committed to one another. That's our goal. And if you have 5 people who do that, that's $2,500 right there. Events, being able to put on high and low dollar events to support your campaign. Direct mail is basically, the same version of an email solicitation, but actually in the mail. And in the mail tends to work really well with our senior citizens. They do like getting those direct mail pieces. And email, which we're very accustomed to seeing, in our inboxes. And especially now as we approach March 31st, there's going to be a lot more of those email solicitations asking for money as we close out the quarter. So all these things are really important when it comes to figuring out exactly, if you're ready to run, if you're thinking about, what you need to do. These are just some of the things that we go over when we do our regional leadership training, which is, again, 2 days. We dive a little bit deeper into some of these. And then we also have a really great campaign glossary, which gives you a chance to better understand some of the terminology that we use. So like GOTV, call time, persuadables. So all of these fun words that, people who are in the political industry use when it comes to talking about voters and writing a campaign plan. So since we are approaching 7:45 or 6:45 at your time, because I'm here in DC, I want to give us a chance to, take some questions and see if there's something that we can answer for you, so that we can help you in this process. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat box. And sorry for kind of doing a speed through drive-by with some of these things, but we are so excited because we have so many more resources that we want to share with you, both in person and online. So definitely there's so much we can share with you, and we hope that we can see you in person when we're in Dallas. Thanks, Mia. Appreciate that, Andrea. Hope it was helpful. Hi, Amanda. You're welcome, Ophelia. Hi, Tiffany. We'll also share this PowerPoint presentation for you, so that way you hopefully you weren't scurrying around trying to take notes, but we'll have this for you as well. So Mia's question about social media presence, we actually have a presentation in our 2-day training that is based solely on digital communications. And so we have a trainer, her name is Cheryl Horry. She is an award-winning digital strategist. She comes into our trainings and basically provides an hour presentation on all your digital platforms, whether it's Twitter, email, Facebook, Instagram, really goes through all the different social media platforms. But the way we do our trainings is we base it around a race, and we were looking at a congressional district in Dallas, and we use that as a case study. And what we do is we work with you to break down the Republican and Democrat who are running for the seat. And basically what we do is armchair quarterback. And what we do is we help you with our consultants to break down what it looks like. So then that way you see it on a somewhat larger scale and then apply some of those techniques for yourself. Let's see, we do have a cohort of all of our all of our participants, basically. Once you become a participant in any of our regional trainings or our national leadership training, then you are in a closed private group of all of those participants. So the question in regards to, do you by chance have a social media group in terms of connecting people in the API community who are interested in running for office, you would be connected to that group once you go through our training. Considering taking public speaking classes, Toastmasters, etc. So there's a question about just wondering, would you suggest that someone running for office consider taking public speaking classes? It's always helpful to be, I would say, confident and comfortable in whatever it is that you're talking about. And what people want to see more than anything else is authenticity. And so your own speaking style is always going to be based really about your comfort level on the material that you're sharing. So if it means that public speaking classes or instruction will be what you need to become confident in that, then yes. A lot of times more advanced trainings, and this is something that we'll probably be incorporating in the future for some of our advanced electeds, would be media training, because it's also two very different things. You use them differently. So media training to be able to get, if you're doing a radio interview versus a TV interview, and then also just when you're speaking with a group of people. So we do work with a journalist who helps us with that, but that's more for our advanced groups. We don't necessarily have, a company that we particularly advocate for in that particular resource. There was a question of how much lead time should you ideally have before launching into a specific elected office race. So a lot of times it's always going to be based around your fundraising ability. It's the first thing that people see in terms of organization. So when I worked with political campaigns, before I was at APAICS, I had my own political consulting firm for 16 years. And so I worked with a lot of elected officials, both in the congressional level and statewide. So you generally need to figure out, in your timing, once you announce for a race, does that give you enough time to the first time you have to do a filing, to come up with a decent number. So a lot of this can be done in the sense of preparation. Probably the number one question I get from candidates in regards to what can I do to prepare for elected office, and I tell people, really massage and maintenance your list, meaning who do you know, who do you think you need to know, so that your list is really expansive. And that means will they give you money? So, you know, I have an example of a candidate that I worked with where I was one of his political consultants. He ran for a statewide office. He was a public, he was already a elected official in the state legislature. In the state that he was elected, they had public financing. So he's never really had to really show his fundraising skills. He just needed to get to the threshold for his fundraising, and then public financing kicked in. And so there was an open US Senate seat, and he decided he was going to run against it, which meant he was in the race against a sitting member of Congress, and I think a couple other people. And so no one thought, you know, a state legislator would be able to, you know, compete with the sitting congressman, you know, in that first filing. And so he just always kept in touch with the people that he went to boarding school. He was a scholarship kid in boarding school. His parents were immigrants. He basically worked in their Chinese restaurant, you know, as, you know, a side order cook. And so it wasn't as if he came from a background of privilege. He got to school on a scholarship. And so he basically just kept in touch with all the people that he met throughout his life. And so whether it was boarding school, college, law school, wherever he went, he always stayed in touch with them. And then it ended up, you know, he announced 6 weeks before the first filing, and we raised $650,000. And so that made him a very viable candidate, because it just showed that he had organization, because he's never had to show that much money ever when he ran for state legislative office. So I always tell people, just broaden your network, you know, get to know as many people as possible who you think will be able to, who are aligned with your values, who understand who you are. How can you be helpful to them in terms of, you know, making sure that you're both, you know, good allies. So working on your, you know, putting together your campaign is really about making sure that you are ready to go with people who are willing to support you in this next step. You're welcome, Fung. Glad that we could be, glad that we could share some insights. So the question is, during your regional leadership training, do you do a deeper dive for that region on the estimated cost for a campaign in that specific area? Yes, because we're pulling from a district that is in your state. So before, earlier this month, we were in Pittsburgh. And so our case study was a district in the surrounding area of Pittsburgh. And so we did the last cycle and basically did a side-by-side. And so you get to see exactly how much it costs. We also pull in election attorneys for the state. So then that way they can share with you deadlines that are important for your state and talk a little bit more about the legal compliance that you also have to do to make sure that you have all that stuff that no one ever wants to think about, because it's all the administrative stuff, you know, prepared so that you don't make rookie mistakes in that way. And so that in itself, I think, is a great opportunity for people to, you know, get to know who are the legal experts, because then even if you can't afford them, they can probably give you some resources to which you can maybe do it yourself. Because a lot of times election law and all those types of deadlines, you know, it goes state by state, but a lot of times the governing body that manages the process can be very understanding in explaining the process. So, you know, we do that in all of our states that we go to make sure that they have at least one person that they can call who understands the compliance rules, who can then help them either walk it through or, you know, give them another resource so that they can get the answers that they need. So we are coming down to our last 5 minutes. I can take one more question before I close if there's any other questions left. You're welcome. Okay, so really, it's been such a privilege for me to be here with you. I'm sorry that we aren't there physically to be able to see each other's faces, but we hope that we can see you in Dallas when we get there. And so we will do another women's, collective event with ReflectUs when we get back to Dallas, and then a 2-day regional training. So I highly recommend that you sign up for both the ReflectUs and to the APAICS newsletter so that you can be updated on our activities. We are, in the moment now of reconfiguring some of our programming because we are in a unprecedented time, so where we are spending a lot of time apart. And so we want people to still see us as a resource, because that is what we are. And we are all about demystifying the process to making it easier for people like us to run for office. And so really encourage you to sign up for all of the things that ReflectUs is doing in Dallas. In fact, we have a couple more trainings that are being run by members of the coalition. So April 18th, a Vote Run Lead workshop, and then April 24th, She Should Run. And so I highly recommend that you take as many types of trainings as possible for you to, again, increase your network, find more people who are interested in running for office and others who might be aligned with your values, because that's how we broaden our networks. And it's all about intersectionality. So please sign up for those classes if you have time, and also share with your friends all the work that ReflectUs and APAICS is doing. And so if they weren't here tonight and couldn't make it because you knew that they had something else, we'll be sharing the recording. Have them sign up also. As Alex mentioned, we have an annual summit. That's the Women's Summit. When I joined APAICS, I recognized that we were not creating community for our AAPI women. We have 3 US senators who are of Asian American ancestry, heritage, and that's the most exclusive club in the world, but yet we only have 47 Asian American women in state legislative seats where there are over 7,300 seats. So you really need to be a resource to our community so that more women feel empowered to run for office. And so that's why we're here. So I've got 2 more minutes left with you. So if anything else you need from us, I'm gonna put on here where you can reach us. Also, programs@apaics.org, and that will allow you to email us any questions that you have. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and please stay in touch.